So I started the week with the state of macroeconomics, and it's in disarray. I should have showered. I don't know why. You're always attracted.
We are chasing BT.
But you know what? I got attacked by a butterfly in Toronto. Yeah. And yeah. Google it. And I Googled it. Can butterflies attack me? And yeah, there's this one species, and it's exactly the one that attacked me. Is if you're near their nest, or if you're near, it was attacking me. Yeah, look it up. I got attacked by a butterfly. So this state of macro is in disarray, and I think that there's always been some debate amongst the mainstream. I think the financial crisis and even COVID has shown that the mainstream are not united, because remember, the great moderation was this idea that the mainstream are united. There's a consensus in macroeconomics, and that consensus has completely fallen out. And for me, this was like an opportunity to argue maybe, this need for an alternative maybe will be successful in sort of trying to get some of our ideas across. And in many ways, I argue that we have gotten many of our ideas across, except they just don't quote post-Keynesians. And, they don't. So, and that's unfortunate. And then what they do is they kind of use some of our ideas. But what that means, if I were a mainstream economist, I'd be so upset. The real world is really not going according to what they argue. And the big difference, as I said, is theirs is a model of convergence and stability, whereas ours is instability and fragility. Two very different views of the world. Two visions. Every year I start my class, every year my first class in every class is about two competing visions of the economic system. And there was a time when some people, and you have some enlightened mainstream who recognize that this real world is not as stable as we think. And these are what Levois has called the dissenters. Okay, fine. Then what we did the second day, we said, okay, so what is this alternative? Well, it's the post-Keynesian theory, and I defined what post-Keynesian theory was. I gave you 10 sort of characteristics: uncertainty, historical time, aggregate demand, fiscal dominance, income distribution, conflict institutions, and realistic. We have to be, and this is pure Keynes and Kalecki, we have to be able to describe the real world. And if we don't, as Keynes tells us, the opening paragraph of the general theory, the consequences can be disastrous. And we're living the consequences. The financial crisis was not a black swan. It was, the inherent fragility from deregulation that took maybe 30 years, but finally caught up and the system collapsed. That's what the financial crisis was. A failure of capitalism. And then, unlike the Great Depression, when the system collapsed in the Great Depression, we adopted a number of policies, regulations, to fix the system. And the system became more stable for about 30 years, golden years of capitalism. Financial crisis happened, we don't do that. We had an opportunity in 2010 to adopt regulations, taxes, etc. We didn't do that. So our current system, instead of becoming stable, remains unstable. So it's a question of time. It took 75 years. It took 75 years for for the system to break down a second time. Well, we have crises in between. But major crises, it took 75 years. I don't think it's going to take 75 years. We might have a third crisis within, who knows, we can't predict. But I wouldn't be surprised to have a second crisis before I die. And the first crisis led to the emergence of Keynesian policies. So Keynesian, pre-Keynes policy, after Keynes, call them what you. But it led to some sort of fiscal, infrastructure spending, and some New Deal, and the reconstruction of Europe. So this past crisis didn't lead to that. There was no paradigm shift. It was a continuation of neoliberal policies. And so, a next crisis is inevitable. Inevitable. It's just a question of when. Okay. So then, the third day, I talked about more specific. What did I talk about the second day? Post-Keynesian theory, and then the second half, I talked about something.
History of the Post-Keynesian institution.
Yes. And then, third day, I talked about endogenous money, monetary policy. Yesterday, and the monetary circuit. And then yesterday, I deconstructed this model, this mainstream model, in more details. And then I reconstructed the model of monetary policy along income distributive foundations. So today, inflation, because we had to, but then I want to finish on the future of post-Keynesian economics. Who recognizes this picture? If you go to the Centre Pompidou in Paris, there's a big fountain, and above the fountain is this, it's a painting of Dali with some graffiti. I love it, love it, love it. I love this picture. And you see, this is the building next door. This is a building. I like it. So, I want to talk about the future of post-Keynesian economics. What kind of future do we have? And this is based on a paper that's going to come out in the Journal of Philosophical Economics. It should be coming out this year, I'm told. The future of post-Keynesian economics at 50, right? That paper by Kriegel and Eichner in 1975. And this quote by Robinson in her collective papers, I think that is a good starting part because we have the general theoretical scheme by Keynes and Kalecki. But what we need now is we need to have the proper questions and where to look for the answers. My talk on Monday is on the third crisis in economic theory, and I won't talk about that today. But I'm going to talk about, the first crisis having been the Great Depression, and Joan Robinson wrote a paper in '71 on the second crisis. And the third crisis today, after COVID, after the financial crisis, it's much worse than that. It's a polycrisis. And in that context of the polycrisis, we need to ask even more than before, the right questions. But the questions come from having the best or the proper theoretical framework, scheme. If you're mainstream economists, right? Because the mainstream model, the mainstream scheme is about convergence and stability, there is no way you can't talk about crises. Their models don't predict a crisis. Their models don't even accept the possibility of crisis. If your system is converging, it's converging towards the equilibrium. And the equilibrium state. So you need that black swan. So that scheme does not allow to ask you the proper question. What are the causes of a possible crisis? That's the question that we need to ask. And of course, how can we solve it? If the mainstream theory cannot entertain the possibility of a crisis, they have nothing to propose in terms of policy. That's why there was a return of Keynes in 2009. 2007, 2008, mainstream theory, we didn't see this crisis coming. Why? Because our models tell us they can't exist. So therefore we have nothing to propose. What do? We go back to Keynes. Keynes was the scheme that was allowed us to ask the questions and propose the solutions. The first two crises were about aggregate demand. That was Keynes and Kamensky. And so there was a return of the master. But that's because, the realisticness of that scheme, of that framework. I want to talk about the future of the institution of Post-Keynesian economics. I talked about the history of the institution, how it started. Where is it going? I want to talk the future of the theory, and I want to talk the future within the economics profession at large. So we're going to end on a very sort of bigger frame of reference. So we have to acknowledge, I'm not going to put my hands here because I'm afraid people will think and no? Okay. We have to acknowledge that as post-Keynesians, we are a minority within the profession. We don't have the power within the profession. We got truth. Okay? We got wisdom. But that doesn't give you a job at Harvard. And so, yes, we are excluded from major departments. We have to acknowledge that. It's always been the case. We are excluded from publishing in the top journals. Like I said, when I presented my paper at the Bank of England, they said, we don't understand your model, despite the fact that it was written in English. They just don't understand. Okay? So, and therefore, I've had colleagues who I won't even try to publish in a mainstream journal. It will never happen. And but I've had colleagues who sent papers to their, to mainstream journal, and they were turned down. Desk rejected. So we've got to acknowledge that we're left out of important journals, and therefore, there was some financial difficulty at my university a couple of years ago, and I wasn't sure if I was going to keep my job, and finally I did. But I had been approached by a couple of universities in England, and they wanted to maybe create a position for me there, but they were told, this guy doesn't publish in culture. So it's a game, and you have to play that game if you want the better jobs. I'm happy where I am. Okay? But and if you want to get published in those important journals, you got to have dynamic stochastic general equilibrium models. And you got to have, okay? But do we have a future? And if so, what does that future look like? And I think that we do have a future. We do have a future. Okay. I think the future is bright as long as you don't as long as you don't think too big. So I'm going to talk about all these things. There's a growing number of established scholars who have students at the PhD level. We got a number of books, textbooks, number of journals, conferences, summer schools, networks, ability to graduate students, and department renewal, and social media. Okay? And in all of those categories, 2022 and 2023 does not look like 1975. Okay? And so that makes me very optimistic. Today, look, you can't even quote, I can't even list all the important post-Keynesian books. But we've had a number of sort of good relationships with Emmy Sharp and with Edward Elgar. Edward Elgar is as he said, Edward Elgar, post-Keynesian books are the most significant part of their economics list. Okay? And that's because of increased friendships and close collaboration with publishers. If you all have an inclination of becoming an academic, make sure you meet publishers and you talk to publishers and you become friends with them. I've had Alan Sturmer over to my house for dinner a few times in the past 20 years. And then, Elgar was the first place where I've published my book in 1999. Since then, I must have published 30 books with them. And the interesting thing is, when I go to him and I go, oh, I have an idea, he goes, great, I'll publish it. We do the series. And that's because of the relationship that you have. So, I think this is certainly something that's worth developing. The first post-Keynesian book published by Elgar was Philip Orestes in '88. It took a decade, but the second book is New Directions, Post-Keynesian Economics by John Phoebe, 1989, who then created the Review of Political Economy, my journal. Okay. But there were other books before, of course, and this is just a list, but this leads to, Lavoie's book in '92, Orestes, Amitat, Basil Moore, Nicholas Caldo, Eichner books, Minsky, Pazinetti, Crable in '73. Look at this, subtitle, An Introduction to Post-Keynesian Economics. I mentioned this book, and I think it starts with Joan Robinson. Okay, so today there are thousands. Okay. So the point is, there's so many books out there now. So in terms of the institution, I can't keep up with all the books being published on post-Keynesian economics. And that's a good thing. In terms of textbooks, I've told you before, I've asked Paul Davidson around 2000, how come he hasn't published a textbook? And he goes, no one wants to publish it. Maybe Elgar was publishing post-Keynesian books starting in 1988, 1989. And they sold a little bit. But there was no market, so they thought, for a post-Keynesian textbook. But look at today. Lavoie's book is the most read book today. It's the reference. He's got this little book in English. I translated this book in English from the French. Eckhart Hein's book is fantastic. Blecker and Setterfield, fantastic book. Randy Ray has a textbook on on MMT. Another textbook on macroeconomics. My textbook. It's now, and then we have the encyclopedia. This is in its second edition, and we're planning the third edition. Keynesian economics started with Paul Samuelson's textbook in 1949. That's, once you have that textbook, then it grows. And hopefully, these textbooks, some of these are difficult, but this is certainly aimed at undergraduates. And I'm currently editing a book with Mario Seccareccia on undergraduate articles. And I think this is where we can, if you can have a simple undergraduate textbook for undergraduate students, that's when they start getting interested. When I took my class, Post-Keynesian Economics in 1986, the light bulb went off. As a first-year student in economics, what is this stuff they teach us? Supply equals demand. I don't get it. And I had a lot of questions, but I didn't know how to answer. So I took Lavoie's class. There was no textbooks at the time. But I went, wow. So if we can have that same effect, I know that my students, when I teach them neoclassical economics, they go, no. And then I teach them post-Keynesian economics, they go, oh, that makes so much more sense. Okay? So, but we have to reach those undergraduate students. So we need to be able to, these are great, but the third edition of this textbook, the second edition had exam questions at the end and things like that. So we're trying to figure out how can we make this textbook more like a mainstream textbook in terms of the looks. And so we're looking at different mainstream versions and textbooks and how can we, so we need to reach the undergraduate. This is where I think the future is. Okay. Journals. So, Cambridge Journal, JPKE 78, and there were these other sort of heterodox journals, not necessarily post-Keynesian, but the Review of Social Economy. I've got a paper coming out right now in the next issue on the ECB. Métro Economica in 49, Journal of Economic Issues, an institutionalist journal, the Review of Radical Political Economy, the International Journal of Political Economy, edited by Mario Seccareccia. But 82 contributions to political economy, my journal, Rope in 89, e.g. the Economic Journal of Economics and Economic Policy, co-edited by Marc Lavoie, the Bulletin of Political Economy, edited by Sergio Lebrero in Italy, Roque, which I created in 2011, the Brazilian Keynesian Review, the Advances in Economics Education, and I'm jumping over many other journals, And there are a few mainstream journals that are sort of very heterodox friendly. They're not super ranked, but So, according to the Heterodox Economics Directory, there are 141 heterodox journals. Many of them not even ranked. But imagine that. And so, I think that's fantastic. Look at the associations. Progressive Economic Forum in Canada, ADEC in French, Germany. Look at the Japanese Society for Post-Keynesian, the European Association for Evolutionary Political Economy, European Society for the History of Economic Thought, Unit of Radical Economy, Pluralism, Socioeconomics. This is SASI, that just had their conference last week in Rio. Argentina Association of Post-Keynesian, anyways. This is, I don't know where they are, World Economics Association, Association for Social Economics, Keynesian in here, Post-Keynesian in the UK, Heterodox Economics, START in Italy, Portuguese, Rethinking Economics, 121 chapters around the world. And I'm sure that I'm skipping over some major associations. Is Japan there, the Japanese society? Actually,
Yes.
yes, it is there. So, that's fantastic. In the last, and this rethinking, this is in the last 10 years. Rethinking Canada, rethinking Brazil, rethinking Poland, rethinking UK. Okay? I think this is pretty incredible. In terms of blog, of course I put my blog first. Naked Keynesianism by Matthias Zernenko. Billy blog, which is more MNT. New Economic Perspective, Steve Keen's Debt Watch. PEF blog. Progressive Economic Forum from Canada. Tom Palley's blog. Erpy's blog. Concerted Action. 35 heterodox blogs. 35 heterodox blogs. And some of these blogs were, probably created, some of them 20 years ago, but, and I'm skipping on a lot of blogs. These are just, 35 blogs exist now that are heterodox. Okay? Many of them just created in the last decade. If you want to know what's happening with heterodox, just go to Heterodox News. Google Heterodox Newsletter. And they'll tell you forthcoming conferences and forthcoming books, and forthcoming this and that. Okay? Graduate departments. Look, in the United States, American, Bard, Colorado, John Jay. I went to the new school, UMass Boston, UNKC, Utah, Vermont, Campinas, Federal University of Pará, Rio de Janeiro, Minas Gerais, Porto Alegre, Greenwich University, Source, University of Leeds. Oh my God, I'm skipping some in France. Dijon, Grenoble, Lille, Sorbonne, Paris Nord. Roma Tre, Sapienza. That's only like 4 or 5 countries. Okay. I taught a class, a post-Keynesian class at a university in Poland. Yeah, okay. So the future of theory. This is a bit more sort of problematic. I quote David Dukesh, who's here
Yes.
in Campinas, having lunch with him on Sunday. Never met him, so. So a lot of people see, so the post-Keynesian school, you have what's called the post-Keynesians, the Sraffians, who are inspired by Sraffa, the Kelekians, who are inspired by Keletsky, the Marxists. And the discussion is, do they agree? Or are they two different? Paul Davidson, no, they're two different. Marxists should never be considered post-Keynesians. Neither should Kelekians. And so that has led to a lot of people claiming there's a lack of theoretical core. And this is what I'm working on right now when I sent this paper that I wanted to be written, signed by Kelekians and Sraffians and institutionalists. And we'll see what happens to this. But maybe the future, I think in theory, if we can get that paper written and signed by a number of people, and to show that there is a theoretical core that Marxists and Sraffians and Kelekians and post-Keynesians and institutionalists can agree on, I think that would be a huge step forward for the future of heterodox economics. Okay. There's a lot we need to do. And so one of the things I'm trying to do as editor is I'm trying to see where we need to find common grounds amongst approaches. So now I just wrote a paper on the common core ideas between Sraffians and Post-Keynesians on monetary policy and income distribution. Ricardo Suma from Rio de Janeiro is doing a symposium on the common grounds between post-Keynesians and Sraffians on supermultiplier and endogenous money. So I'm trying to identify, I just wrote to him about, how about doing a symposium on uncertainty and the different institutionalists and Marxists to see if there's some agreement on this concept. We have 3 or 4 pages. So the idea is trying to find common ground on various approaches. And I think this is something that we're going to have to try to, how do we deal with ecological concerns? Post-Keynesians believe in growth of effective demand. How do we reconcile that with degrowth models? So, we have to find common ground here. And what I mean by common ground is you can still have your model of degrowth, and I can still have my model of effective demand and growth, but we need to find some sort of common ground that we agree on. And so this debate between Lavoie and Weber, I'm trying to encourage them to write a blog together and say, yeah, I might be over here and she might be over there, but there's some overlap here. And if you can identify overlaps, it encourages people, makes people, I think this is what I'm betting, that people will be encouraged by those overlaps. And then we'll be able, and Isabella is very much in favor of this blog, to show the world, look, because when she goes on. So one of the things that Mark Lavoie's blog did was that it led to some mainstream saying, you can't even agree amongst yourselves. And so the argument, and that was an unintended sort of consequences. So I'm trying to kind of repair the damage that I initiated. I convinced Lavoie to write that blog. So maybe if we can try to find some common and see, no, we agree on some aspects, and that's good. And it's okay if you have some more radical ideas here and you have more radical ideas there. But we have some common elements that we can build on. And that, I think, is something that we're going to have to work on. So stock flow is great, but like Lavoie says, it's not going to get you a hearing. And so that's why I applaud the young scholars who do fancy econometrics and bar models and things of that nature, because you can communicate and you can get a hearing. Just as long as you don't forget the theory behind them. Now, for me, there's an inconsistency. I've talked about this. Why do we accept or reject price mechanisms in open economy, or why do some people accept it while we reject price mechanisms in labor market? And on that point, I'm trying to work on a paper with an Italian economist at University of La Sapienza, Di Politi, and because I was telling him when I was in Rome, I said, no, and he goes, I think the same thing. And so I think that when it comes to exchange rate, this is going to be the more complicated part, because the price mechanisms in the money market, I think there's a lot of convergence now amongst post-Keynesians about these parking it rules that I've developed. I think this is the rejection of fine-tuning. So this is sort of, becoming the consensus. So there's consensus in the labor market and the money market. I think this is where the argument needs to be done. One thing that I can certainly argue is that flexible exchange rates don't necessarily lead to improve economic performance. It's not because your exchange rate goes down that you have improved, So what's the purpose of a flexible exchange rate? We have to talk about inflation, but then if you have a fixed exchange rate, you may need to adopt capital controls or some sort of regulations. But I've always said post-Keynesian economics was about regulations. Okay. And then finally, the third point is a future within the profession. If there's a pyramid of power, post-Keynesians are certainly at the bottom. So Diedrich McCloskey is a very famous mainstream economist. And Diedrich used to be called Donald, so she transitioned. And she tells the story, she was in the house, and she tells the story that when she was still Donald, she went to her university professor, and she told him that she was transitioning into a woman. And according to her, the president says, "Thank God, I thought you were going to tell me that you were going to become a Marxist." So it's this pyramid. So post-Keynesians may not be at the bottom, maybe Marxists are at the bottom. Okay? But the point is, there is this sort of, and I do believe that a lot of our ideas are filtered through, but we're still lacking a clear dialogue with the mainstream. So when Blanchard wrote his blog on conflict inflation, I reached out to him and said, "Why can't you quote post-Keynesians? It's a core idea of ours." And he acknowledged, and he wrote, he tweeted, or he X'd, I want to acknowledge the work of post-Keynesians. Great. So I sent him an email. I go, "Great, listen, let's have a webinar, he goes, "No."
Yeah.
So, there's this reluctance to engage with us. So for him, acknowledging our work was as far as he wants to go. So it led to a big question is, how do we engage with the mainstream? And it's a question that is very preoccupied a lot of people. And Marc Lavoie and Frederick Lee did a symposium in Rope, and then that was published in their book as well, in which I have a chapter with Peter Doherty. And essentially, and this is from the book, King has chapter 1 in the book, John says, you either fight them, you fight the mainstream, you cooperate with them, or you ignore them. And post-Keynesians have fought them, the capital critiques, for example. And that didn't lead us anywhere. Samuelson recognized that Joan Robinson was right. The mainstream has acknowledged that the concept of a production function is completely ridiculous in a multi-good or Schumpeterian monetary world, outside of the one world, one good world. They've acknowledged that. Nothing happened. And then they went back to production function. Okay? But Davidson, he says we should attack them at every possibility. I'm not sure. There was an opportunity. Steve Keen had an exchange on Twitter with Paul Krugman on banks, on endogenous money. And Krugman, who won the Nobel Prize, still believes in banks as financial intermediaries. How can you be a Nobel laureate and believe in that? And Steve Keen, and I've been critical of Steve McCollum, and Steve Kreen's is, you're stupid. So what do you think Krugman's going to do? Block him, or you're stupid. No. I was told, Steve, I said, you should have said, hey, thanks, but, let's talk about maybe another version, I think today, if that opportunity arises, I think that, so my approach to Blanchard was, hey, great, listen, let's have a dialogue, let's have a webinar, he said no, but at least I didn't say, hey, you're stupid. And I think that was a missed opportunity between Keene and Krugman. Fred Lee always has said we should ignore the mainstream. And to a certain degree, I agree. I don't care what the mainstream is, in a way, saying about this or that. I'm going to put forward my own models in a positive contribution, positive development of post-Keynesian economics. The problem is, here I am, I created so I think you have to leave here with just one conclusion. I'm a hypocrite. That's the conclusion. Because here I am, created a blog attacking the mainstream ideas on interest rates. So I don't think you can ignore them. You can't ignore them. When interest rates are at 10%, etc., you can't ignore the policies. Okay? So I think you should attack. I think you can't ignore. And the one that we preferred was, maybe we should engage with, probably not the mainstream, but people in business departments. Or Matthias Vernengo thinks that we should engage with policy people. People who are interested very much in policy. He's had a lot of success engaging with Barry Aikengreen on policy issues. They don't discuss theory. They discuss policy. And they disagree, and sometimes we agree. Look, and Paul Krugman is against these interest rates that's so high. Okay, maybe we can, and at the end of the day, if we can agree on policy, the interest rates are high, then we can have a common front to say we need to bring interest rates down. So I think that there's something to be said about engaging with non-mainstream economists in business. Look, when I talk to my people in the business department at my university or others, and I talk to them about, firms behave in a markup, and they go, yes, so? They totally understand. Because they tend to be more practical. I sat on a plane on the way to New Orleans years ago, and I sat next to a guy who works for Frito-Lay, the chips, Frito-Lay, not Ruffles, but Frito-Lay. And he worked in the pricing division. And I bumped with Miles, I put myself in, not first class, because it is business class, and I was sitting next to him. And I said, how do you thank you, it was nice meeting you. Nice meeting you. Bye-bye. Nice meeting you. And I said, how do you figure out that the chips are worth $1? And he goes, well, we know the price of potatoes, and we know the price of oil, and how much it costs to heat the oil, and how much the bag costs, and how much the machine right? That's post-Keynesian theory. So people in the business world, we may disagree, they may be, we want profits, we disagree with the redistribution, but there are some basic elements that we can agree with. So, and then finally, Stockhammer, he favors a dialogue with other disciplines. We should have a dialogue with sociologists and political scientists, and etc. And for the record, I agree with pretty much all of these, because I certainly criticize the mainstream, although I don't ignore them. That's probably the one that I disagree with, but the rest I do. I published in Rope a symposium on what can economists learn from sociologists. And Steve Pressman, the former editor, is writing something on what can economists learn from I haven't gotten any of the papers yet. Political science, I'll say political something. And so, yeah, there's maybe some dialogue with other. Now, on the other hand, as your professor mentioned, reminded me yesterday, much of political science today is being driven by these models that we disagree with. So maybe that. Oh no, he's doing it with anthropologists. That's what he's doing. So I don't know, but I think that in terms of the future, we certainly have to try to engage with the mainstream in one way or the other, and there's some success here and there. And so, like I said, a lot of our ways, I remember the Bank of Canada 5-6 years ago talked about animal spirits. That was quite remarkable. And I sent I always send emails to these people. They usually don't answer. I don't think they like to be. Who told me recently? I emailed someone about an idea of his paper, and I go, hey, by the way, I think it was monetary policy and income sensitivity. I said, hey, by the way, this is some of the work we've been doing. He replies, you don't own that topic. And I go, no, but, if our job is to quote people who've done work on this before, I'm just telling you, here's some work from some people who've done work on it. Okay. I like this quote by John where he said, mainstream macro theory is wrong. So we do need to point that out, but we do need to do it in a way that's engaging. Okay? And that's it. So I think that, hold your applause. Oh, I've never said that before. Hold your applause, please. In my paper on the future, I say, I think the future is super bright as long as we don't aspire too much. Yeah, no. We have all these institutions and all these, and that's great, but I don't think we'll overthrow the mainstream profession. But I think that we can carve a good niche for us in that sense. Now you can applaud. So let's have, thank you, so unexpected. Let's have some questions.
Not a question yet, but I would like to remind everyone that the meeting for AKB, the Keynesian Brazilian Association, will be held in Niterói. That is near you guys, you can stay in Rio if you want to. And the paper submission schedule was postponed again, so I have like 6 more days. It's like it's almost the 10th right now.
In which town?
Niterói.
Close to Rio de Janeiro, on the other side.
That's
of
the
bay.
one in the end of August.
Yeah, it's September, I think, end of September.
Yeah, I think it is.
So what's the one at the end of August that Modenese tells me?
No, Modenese is coming here for what we call the week of economics. The undergraduate students organize every August. They organize the undergrad students this week, and they call professors and other professionals that they want to gather to discuss topics on economics. And it happens in August because in Brazil, in August there is the Day of the Economists. It's August 13th. I think.
It's around there.
Yes, around, it's in August that we celebrate this day. So the undergraduate students, they make this here at in our department, but I think it's pretty much something usual in many departments. The students organize a week so they think about what they want to discuss and who they want to invite.
Yeah.
And in general, the head of the department contributes in order to allow people to come to their costs and tickets. So, Modenese, I think we are going to be together discussing inflation.
Okay, cool. Good. Oh, lots too. Yeah. Inflation in Brazil.
Inflation is
Very good. Do you largely agree,
with
Modenese?
yes, I think both of us attack the mainstream, so we agree on that. And but I really don't know what is that he's thinking lately
Yeah.
with this process of inflation, this inflation that we have been having in the last 2 years. But in general, I like very much what Modenese
Okay.
does. So I don't think we will disagree that much, but it's nice to disagree.
Yeah, of course.
Yes, but because it's the way we go forward.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
I like to disagree, especially in front of students. I think it's important for students to see
Yeah.
that we can disagree, and it's okay to disagree.
Yeah, and Modenese, you probably is so nice. That it's difficult to disagree with him. He's such a nice person, but he's a very
I spent a day with him in Rio.
Yes.
He lives in Rio.
He is very, very nice.
Yeah.
A kind person.
Questions? Yes.
I believe that was Monday that you said, that Simone said too, that you are a political economist.
Mm.
So I want to know for you, and so Simone, if you want to ask too after, what is to be a political economist?
So for me, I think we're going to agree. For me, an economist is the mainstream. They use models, and they don't have any institutions in there. They don't have frame of reference. Their model could be applied to 18th century England or to 21st century Brazil. A political economist takes into consideration institutions, social structures, social movements, power distribution, power. You have to take this into consideration in your approach to, because both economists, political economists, they look at the same problem. But because we take with inflation, we take into consideration many other factors, that's a political economist for me. What do you?
Yeah, pretty much agree with him. First of all, disagree in terms of the methodology of mainstream economics, and also it's on the ontology. What is your what we have as a subject is different in some sense. And the methodology also, so I think that, and I do like this, economics is a social science. We don't have to try to be like physics or mathematics, so we use the instruments, but we are dealing with social science. So the economy is inserted in the society, and society changes all the time because of institutions, because of social conflicts and class struggle. So this is the departure point. So what I think is the main subject that I am interested in. So this is one thing, and that I think is very important. And also, as I have mentioned, I think on Monday, I have a Marxist background, so because this is my story now. When I was as an undergraduate student, and I was almost leaving the university or the Department of Economics because it didn't make any sense for me. I come from a traditional mainstream department, Federal Rio Grande do Sul. And anything, no, I couldn't understand, and it didn't make sense, and I didn't like that. But I was convinced that why don't you try in another year, one more year, and then the first class that I took that started to make sense for me was of political economy, Marxist political economy, but not my professor at that time was not a traditional Marxist. He was and he is a political economist. What I mean by that, it's not that Marx couldn't have a dialogue with other authors that are not inside this small box of Marxist authors. Okay, so this was my introduction to the Marxist approach, and after that I got in touch with the Post-Keynesian approach. So I didn't even know that this thing was, I don't know what that means, but for me, Campinas was the perfect place because these that I understand as political economy is what we have been doing here for decades. So we have this tradition coming, I think, mainly from Beluso, but also from Conceição Tavares and our so-called founding fathers and mothers, that they have this dialogue all the time, and they incorporate, in terms of classical authors, incorporate Schumpeter as well. So either he's a conservative guy, but he is a political economist. He knew, and he wrote that for you to be a good economist, you have to know history, you have to know institutions, you have to know theory, and you have to know statistics.
You know who was his student?
Minsky.
Minsky.
Yes. And that's it. And so this is the methodology that we have to incorporate. And when we have an author that go to the roots of what that problem is, that economic and social problem, that not only model things, but think which are the real questions that we have to ask. Which are the real questions? Yeah. So this is interesting, and I think that this is political economy. We go to the roots, but we have to be able also to try to interfere in the current, state of affairs, and that is a challenge.
Yeah.
But it's what we
Let me read you a quote by Keynes.
third time.
The
Yesterday was 6.
The master economist must possess a rare combination of gifts. He must be mathematician, historian, statesman, philosopher. He must understand symbols and speak in words. He must contemplate the particular in terms of the general and touch abstract and concrete in the same flight of thought. He must study the present in light of the past for the purpose of the future. No part of man's nature or his institutions must be entirely outside his regard. He must be purposeful and disinterested in a simultaneous mood, and aloof and incorruptible as an artist, yet sometimes as near to earth as a politician. It's a great quote.
Yeah, it's a great quote. I think there's nothing more to say. At least on my side.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
We have to talk.
The
about
essay. The essay. I want 20 pages. She's insisting on
No.
about 100. And I say no. Between 15 and 20 pages, double space, excluding cover and references. Okay? So that means in a paper that length, 2-page introduction, 2-page conclusion, and that leaves you about 13 to 16 pages in the middle to develop your core. And your core should have maybe 3, maybe 4 subdivisions. It's a question you want to ask, and you're answering it in there. And the core of your paper has 4 answers. Section 1 is this, section 2 is this, section 3 is this, and that's all part of your answer. An introduction with a conclusion. Email me if you want clarification.
Is there a specific theme?
No.
No, I think we covered a lot of
Yeah.
topics here, so I think that
You can,
within this broad range of topics, you can choose.
monetary policy.
But if you have any question, you can reach me.
What is post-Keynesian economics? Start with a chapter by Lavoie in chapter 1, or my chapter that I presented here, and then there's other people who've written on that. So there's a lot of topics in there. There's a lot of topics in there.
How much time?
What are we? We are Friday, Monday.
Morning.
I think we said September 15th. End of September. End of September is fine. End of September is fine. And if you struggle with English, write it in Portuguese and use Google Translate. It's good. Google Translate is good today. You know, it's going to help you a lot. I've translated articles for the journal using a similar program, and instead of translating the paper, I got the computer to translate it, and then I just edited the English version. It's pretty good. It's pretty good.
ChatGPT also helps in this sense. Yeah. But you have to edit.
Yeah, you have to.
Yeah, you don't ask him, no. It's not like Post-Keynesian Economics. Write it in Portuguese.
But after translating, you have to put it again, because many times they translate.
Yeah, and it's good if you read also.
Writing the essay is the easy part. Rereading and editing yourself is the more complicated part. I'll give you a quick example. I had it when I was in Kalamazoo. I had a student, and she had never written papers before. And she took 3 or 4 classes with me, and I always have essays in my classes. She learned how to write an essay, and she was good. She was a good student. She ended up working in the Federal Reserve, and she worked in the division on Latin America. And Greenspan, who was at the time the governor, was going to Latin America. I can't remember. I think it was Brazil. And he asked that office to write a 3-4 page summary of what's happening in Brazil on economics. And she's the one who wrote it. He was so impressed. Met her and gave her a job in his office. Okay? So a 3-page essay is the same as a 20-page essay and the same as a 500 page book. It's all about the structure and how you structure your arguments and the paper itself. Don't send me one 20-page paper with no paragraph, with only one paragraph. Thank you very much for coming and assisting, and maybe I'll see you next week if you're around.